What does it mean when a minister sets a timer? Nothing. Nothing whatsoever.
Let's go, brother.
My name is Stanten. I'm from Chicago. My background is I was an engineer and in tech for about 9 years, 26 years of full-time ministry. I had been at one time or another an elder, a teacher, evangelist, all that. But about 2010, I thought somebody's got to get good at this conflict stuff. And organizational health, went back to school, got a master's in conflict management from Lipscomb University. I have advanced education from Wheaton College and theology as well. But so in 2014, on the first day of the year, my wife and I started a business. And that's what we do. We've been doing this, it'll be 5 years at the end of this year. 13 locations, 3 corners of the U.S., as well as Hawaii, up in Alaska, the UK, Hope Worldwide, Hope India, and having so much fun. Love what I do. You know what I also love? I love this church. I've met with 108 members of the Seattle Church of Christ. You know, and it's been a real adventure. I've been here as of yesterday, 15 days. I leave late tonight. And I did not know many people here in the north. I mostly knew the Holmans. And I've known the Whitakers a little bit through ministry stuff for the past couple of years. Got to know them more this trip. And loved meeting the Martins and their family. Wow, what cool people. And so many more of you. I have reached a saturation point where I'm mismatching faces and names. So I'm going, hey, bro, good to see you. That was a nice coffee we had, sis, you know, sort of thing. So that's the reality. The material that we're going to go over today is different. I think it's more suitable in places like Seattle than other places because it appeals more to the nerds and geeks of the world. I mean, you got Amazon, you got Starbucks, you have Microsoft. You have Bill Gates in this place. Man, I was tracking everything about Bill Gates back in the early 80s, you know. And so this is a cool place for me to visit. I'm having a good time. So many tech people. That's not the case with Chicago. And so this has been really a great exchange. But why this sermon will appeal to you is this. For those of you that like to think and go deep and contemplate things outside of three-point sermons, this is for you. Now, I know from experience people don't want a sermon like this every Sunday. But this is enough to chew on for a while, okay? We are going to explore an historical event of such magnitude that many of you may say, how come I never knew about this? So if we were going to Google right now, and we look David and Goliath, we'd find 14,800,000 hits. Okay, great story, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't all about God, though. If David were to defeat the giant, his family would never have to pay taxes again. He would get a chunk of change, and he would get the girl. That was the promise. Okay. And then here's the other thing. You know, Malcolm Gladwell came out with a book called David and Goliath, and he contests, makes a really good point, that as long as David kept the armor off, the odds were in his favor. He was more spry, he could run around, and Goliath couldn't catch up with him. Eventually one of these, you know, stones would make it in the skull, because he had done it many times before with wildlife. So here, you know, maybe this is not all about God. So it's a great story. But it's not anywhere, it doesn't touch the story that we're going to look at today. That has only 177,000 hits. Wow. When I'm done, when my life is over, these stats are going to be different. Because this story, I'm going to make sure it is told and retold.
Wow. Come on.
It's that good. I spent 4 months preparing this material a few years ago. Did you know this story? It's the Bible story with the most supporting outside evidence. More than anything in New Testament and Old. Archaeology, other people writing about it. Also, it contains the most important lesson of all time, which obviously is everything should be about God, right? By the way, this is a one-point sermon today. Make it about God. Okay? It involves an evil nation with the gruesome features of Hitler's Germany and Tolkien's Mordor. There's so much that, like when you watch Lord of the Rings, even the weaponry was invented by a nation we're going to be talking about. The catapults, the battering rams, even impaling and crucifixion was then invented by this evil nation. It contains Braveheart-like moments. And it ends in a plot twist greater than belonging to any Star Wars saga. Okay, now raise your hand if you think you know what the story is, but you cannot raise your hand if you heard me preaching it in any of the other regions, or you knew I was going to be talking about this. Does anybody guess this straight just right now, just for the first time you heard about this, and you guessed it? Raise your hand. Happens every time. Happens every time. Here is the story. A long time ago, the Assyrian warrior King Sennacherib sought to rule the entire Middle East. The city of Babylon and the regions of Phoenicia and Philistia were the first to fall during the Dark Lord's quest to conquer Egypt, Ethiopia, and beyond. Only Jerusalem, the capital city of the small nation of Judah, stood in his way when its king Hezekiah defied Sennacherib. You are invited to the story of a standoff during the summer of 701 BC that will be told and retold until the end of time. Get ready.
Yeah, come on, brother.
Get ready. What we know about ancient Assyria is they were military pioneers. They loved war and they loved expansion. Matter of fact, when you became the emperor, you had to prove right away your worth by going out and, doing it, proving yourself, having a war, kicking somebody. And they're braggadocious. We have a lot of world leaders like this today, right? Cruel. They would massacre people and pile up their heads. They would do some things, frankly, that we can't talk about today. You don't want to talk about it on a Sunday service. But it's out there. It's just amazing how evil, how dark, how cruel they were. They impaled people. They invented the crucifixion. They were shameless. And they gloried in seeing their enemies suffer. There were 4 kings mentioned in sequence of Assyria in the Bible. There's a lot in the Bible in this story, by the way. 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, Isaiah, and some of the other prophets. You put it all together. Sennacherib comes in, his father, King Sargon II, around 715 BC, plus or minus, devastated Israel. Those are all the northern tribes. That's Samaria. He dislocated a lot of the people, brought some paganism in, and so you have a mixture of all sorts of stuff. We see that in the New Testament. The Samaritans were kind of half-breeds, kind of gypsy Jews almost. I mean, just kind of, it was real messy. That was all because of Sargon and his activity. And so King Hezekiah comes onto the scene while Sargon is king, worried that they were going to come down into Judah, getting a lot of messages from the prophets of how to get ready for this moment. And then Sargon dies in a battle. Unheard of for an Assyrian king. So his son has got to immediately redeem the history, the legacy of Assyria. And he moves the capital to Nineveh and quickly wipes out Babylon. He's very smart. He's actually an engineer. He developed engineering around, probably more mechanical engineer, around waters and aqueducts and stuff in Nineveh. Very advanced the city from that standpoint. But when he went to take on the Babylonians, they had this real thick wall that they were protected by. He flooded the city out. Very smart guy. And as he moves down towards Palestine in this story, towards 701 BC, we can feel the drama building up. This is the clash of the ages. Matter of fact, it's considered the first world event. I'll talk about that in a bit. He ruled till 681. He was so masterful, never acknowledged his defeats. He's described as a narcissist in secular history. Isaiah served long before this period and well after. His wife was a prophetess. We know that about him. He was the prophet to a number of kings in our Bible. The father of Hezekiah, Ahaz, was a real weak king. He was like a worm. Nothing attractive about the guy whatsoever. And then he was Isaiah right past the time of Hezekiah. He was consulted for special prayers, support for the king. This is during the Hezekiah realm, mostly. He prayed with Hezekiah. He had a lot of spiritual perspectives. He provided a prophetic map for the future. He had warnings about alliances, and he predicted the future about Sennacherib. And he was the record keeper. He's the prince of prophets. All prophets in the Old Testament are measured up against Isaiah. Served about 50 years. Heavily involved in the story we're looking at today. Had a major influence on Hezekiah. If you read Isaiah 10 and 11, it talks about the remnant of God's people all coming together in one day, coming into the fold. The child would play with the cobra and the lion and the lamb and all that kind of stuff. These are metaphors for people that were naturally hostile to one another coming together. And Hezekiah was all about that. From the moment he became king, he actually created a Passover event at the wrong time of the year, done real sloppily, but it was an opportunity to get the people from Israel to come in, the people that were still survivors of all that, to come on down. They were theologically incorrect. It would be like today us inviting, the Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, the Catholics, and the Baptists to be part of what we do, but having vastly different doctrines. But we have a little bit of history going way back. That's really the situation when Hezekiah said, we are going to set up a Passover to worship God. Really radical, outside the box. But you can see Isaiah's influence on him. He was described as there's no one like him. If you ask a typical Christian today who's the greatest king in all the Old Testament, they'll just say David, hands down. They don't even have to think about it. If you ask a Jew who the greatest king in the Old Testament is, they'll say Hezekiah. And I think they know their Old Testaments better, that's why. Because if you look at David real close up, man, what a mess. What a mess. And especially towards the end of his life, he was like losing his mind. I wonder if he was eating lead or something, because he was just he did not go out and stop. Okay. Hezekiah actually says in the scriptures, there was no king like him before or after. He's the dude. And this story is contained in Isaiah 36 and 38, but it's contained elsewhere as well. And he's really tightly linked with Isaiah. You know what? I did a study one time that found out that there were about 7 decent kings. Most of them were good, 7. Decent to good kings in the Old Testament. Every one of them, we can identify the prophet that was in their life. That's a really good message for us, right? Have people in your life. And multiple people is really the best thing. And anyway, it's really significant. Okay, he was the un-Ahaz. He was the unfather of his father, And he created a Renaissance spirit. You know what I found out about this story? This is a really wild thing. I was writing a book, and it was about Renaissance and technology. This is a secular book. Renaissance and technology and printing and voyaging and economy and all sorts of stuff, because there's been numerous Renaissances. There's the big one from 1440 to 1520. There's a bunch of other ones in later periods, even medicine and so forth. And I found a link that says the Hezekiah of Renaissance, or the Renaissance of Hezekiah. I'm like, what is that? Look at this. And I found out scripturally, he rediscovered the books of the Bible. He didn't have them in Judah. His dad didn't care. They were in Israel. He somehow recovered them from Israel and brought them into Jerusalem. And that he used for a rebirth of Judah. It is right there in the scriptures. So he's the biggest person in the Bible that has a recovery moment, a rebirth, a renewal. And he was a unifier. And it seems like he had some propensity to be an engineer. We'll get into that in a little bit too. This is his seal. It was found very, very recently in a garbage dump in Jerusalem. And you don't have a whole bunch of seals just hanging around because you have that, they mark the official manuscripts and documents as it came. So, and then this partnership they had, they both were prayerful, both were courageous. They were outside the box thinkers. They had a spiritual relationship. And Isaiah was Hezekiah's confidant. So really cool. If you study this stuff out for yourself, first of all, it takes a long time because there's so much there. For me, studying stuff like this out keeps me out of spiritual trouble. When I'm in my Bible, I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. All of a sudden, my imagination goes to the greatest places. I get insights. I make them practical. And all of a sudden, I'm like supercharged. You know, sometimes we need supercharged just to get out of the house, right? Yeah. You know, you're going to be around people you work with that are crabby and manipulative or toxic or whatever. Sometimes you just got to get supercharged. And for me, it's really digging in and studying the Bible. So this is the setting for the first real First World War. It's called the First World Event by some historians because it's the first time in all history that many nations are watching all at the same time for the outcome. They're like, what is going to happen? It's like our 9/11. It's like the whole world's watching. But this is the first one in recorded history. And Sennacherib, he wants to get all the way down into here. I know, cool fact, right? He wants to get down into here. He wants to get into Ethiopia and Egypt. And guess who's in the way? A little tiny kingdom, Judah, 47 cities. And it has capital, Jerusalem. And it's really the smallest nation in the whole story. God set this up really nice. This is the real David and Goliath, by the way. So it was the holder of the law. Everything that we now have in our Bibles today, there's, probably 500 translations in English. I mean, there's so many in English if you really study it all out. And then there's all the foreign translations. They're all dependent on manuscripts, this right here. And this is the last group of people that are worshiping Yahweh, Lord, completely. This room here at the British Museum, and it's much larger than you can tell from this, has on the wall these reliefs. It's telling Sennacherib's version of a battle of the southernmost city of Judah, Lachish. It was the last city right before Sennacherib's army of at least 185,000. We don't know. Before they were going to go to Jerusalem for the showdown we're talking about here. And on these walls, there are physical descriptions of these horrific things the Assyrians were doing to the people of Judah. We know about the story also because of Isaiah. And this prison here, there's 3 of them. One's in Israel, one's in the British Museum, and one's in Chicago at the Oriental Institute. This is actual text written by Sennacherib of his interpretation of this story. And then, of course, Herodotus, early Greek historian, and other manuscripts. So, spring of 701 BC, the invasion starts. Jerusalem was the last standing city. Refugees from Israel coming in saved their lives. And the incoming reports are horrible. People that are escaping, like battles of Lachish, are headed straight for Jerusalem because they have walls. The inhabitants of the city are having wild parties, actually getting drunk because they're going to die tomorrow. That's their mentality. Why not? We're going to die tomorrow. Let's get drunk. Or they're praying, or they're preparing the city. So what they're doing is they're tearing down their houses to refortify the walls. And even your enemies are looking at your leadership. The Philistines, forever enemies, captured a king that defected to support Sennacherib, their king, captured him and took him to Hezekiah and said, what do we do with him? Because they're looking to Hezekiah for leadership. That story is not in the Bible. It's just in one of the very secular accounts. And there's tension between what Isaiah and 2 of the other prophets were saying and what Hezekiah was doing. These are all great men, by the way. But there's tension. They're not exactly all on the same page. Not the way you want to be in a major crisis. where leadership is not all unified. Really tough. So I'm merging all three major prophets together. Hosea, who just recently died about 10 years ago, seeing this coming. Micah up here of Hezekiah and Isaiah. And here's putting them all together. The whirlwind that brings disaster will bring invaders all the way to Zion's gates. You will also be rubble unless you accept Yahweh's plan to purge the territory from corrupt seers, prophets, and leaders from the idolatry of the people. Therefore, Judah, step away from Israel's snares, or terror will overtake you. Judah, Yahweh will judge you. Jerusalem, if you worship him and welcome the remnant to worship, embrace justice, and are the guardians of his law, then the Assyrians will come no further than your gate. He will save you, but not by bow or sword or battle, or by horses and horsemen. So this is the kind of stuff that's in Hezekiah's space. We're going to be okay if we do a bunch of right things. But should we prepare swords? Should we fortify the wall? Is God going to help use those things? Is he going to help make us better warriors? But I'm hearing no. But that doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense to sit around and say, God, you do this thing. It was hard to calculate. So here's Hezekiah's option. Resistance, like fight. Or immediately surrender. Or negotiate. And so number 2 and 3 are risky because you cannot trust anything the Assyrians say. They will only allow you any kind of privilege to be a vassal state if it serves their best interest. But if they don't even slightly trust you, they're just going to wipe you out. And you are going to suffer. 2 and 3 don't look good, neither does 1. So we're looking like, what is the 4th option? Have you ever been in your Christian life feeling stuck? If I do this, it won't go good. If I do that, it won't go good. If I do that, it won't go good. If I do this, it won't go good. If I do that, it won't be good. If I do this, it won't be good. And then you go back and forth. You're just like, man, I'm stuck. Christians get stuck sometimes just because they're not open with their life. And there's something going on that they're afraid to kind of come clean on. And if they do, their spouse or other people look down on them, might be really mad. They might lose face. Might even involve some sort of risk. But if I don't, I feel bad. If I just hold on. And so Christians create traps for themselves. And so this was a trap. Because Hezekiah was having trouble getting outside of these 3 options. Because logically, if you look at the rest of the ancient history of the Bible, you just go out and fight. Say, God's on my side. But you're way, way outnumbered here. So, this is what Isaiah says. By the way, this is a tunnel that was 1,740 feet long. It was built from one end to the other. It looks like it took about 5 years. Hezekiah was preparing Jerusalem by making sure all the nearby water was coming underground into the city, so the invaders, when that day would come, would have no water in the area. It's called Hezekiah's Tunnel. It's considered a marvel. And recently it was found, I think in the 60s, where the 2 met. There's a plaque that described where they met, and they were only off by a couple of inches. And it's magnificent. And I've had the opportunity to go in there. I didn't. I wish I did, because that'd be a great selfie to take, right? But I have a friend who was in here. But anyway, here's what Isaiah says. He's not so impressed with the tunnel. The Lord, Yahweh, stripped away the defenses of Judah. You looked in that day to the weapons in the palace of the forest. You saw that the walls of the city of David were broken through in many places. You stored up water in the lower pool. You counted the buildings in Jerusalem and tore down houses to strengthen the wall. You built a reservoir between the 2 walls for the water of the old pool. But you did not look to the one who made it, or have regard for the one who planned it long ago. So Hezekiah's cool idea isn't so cool to Isaiah. Yes, they had a great relationship, but one was so closer to father, so much more mature, and kind of outside the dysfunction, he could see what was really going on. The invasion begins. It says, he appointed military officers over the people. He gathered the officers in front of him in the open area of the city gate. He gave them these words, okay, the Braveheart moment. Be strong, be brave. Don't be afraid. Don't lose hope. The king of Assyria has a huge army with him, but there's a greater power with us than there is with him. The only thing he has is human strength. But the Lord, Yahweh, our God is with us. He will help us. He'll fight our battles. And the people had great faith in what Hezekiah, the king of Judah, said. Man, I could just hear the John Williams or James Horner soundtrack. You know, it's just kind of, wow, yeah, there he is. And the people are moved. This moment didn't last very long, by the way, but it's cool. These are great words. I want to make sure I introduce something that you may not already know. When you look in the Old Testament and see capital L-O-R-D, that is, the Hebrew behind that is without, we don't have vowels in Hebrew language, but it's either Yahweh or Jehovah or some variation. Both versions have emerged as one is more likely than the other or whatever. The NIV translators have done what the ancient Hebrews did, is they put the word Lord in there because that's what the Jews did when they came across the name of God. They wouldn't say Yahweh. They would just use the Hebrew word for Lord. The reason they did that is twofold. Number one is they felt ashamed of themselves. They had not lived up worthy of who he was. There was so much devastation. Number two is they didn't want the pagans to know the name of their God because they would defile the name of their God. So that's a little tidbit that becomes important here very, very soon. So here's Sennacherib telling the story many years later, but it's important for where we are now in the story. I decimated the enemy host with arrow and spear, and all their bodies I bored through. I cut their throats like lambs, cut off their precious lives as one cut string. Like many of the waters of the storm, I made the contents of their gullets and entrails when deep into the earth. And I'm not going to go any further. 150,000 people died in Judah. 46 of the 47 cities are gone. They're all gone. And the few escapees have made it to Jerusalem. Now, Hezekiah gets weak. He's just freaking out. All these bad reports coming in. What are you going to do? Your knees are going to buckle. So he starts to negotiate with Sennacherib through a commander. He says, I've done wrong, withdraw from me, and I'll pay whatever you demanded me. And he basically started giving gold stripped from the temple. So he has a real weak moment. He's trying to do that, negotiate to be a vassal king kind of thing. Some commentators think he's actually being strategic, just buying time. I don't know. I think even the best people get weak for a moment. And that looks like weakness. So we can relate with Hezekiah. Sometimes we don't step up and do the right thing. Within earshot of Jerusalem, the commander is speaking in Hebrew. Matter of fact, the Jews say, don't speak in Hebrew. We will speak to you in your language. And they're like, no, I'm going to speak in your language so the people behind the walls can hear me. And their tongue, they need to know what's going to happen to them. And the supreme commander says, and whom are you depending that you rebel against me? Look, I know you're depending on Egypt, that splintered reed of a staff which pierces the hand of anyone who leans on it. Such as Pharaoh, king of Egypt. All depend on him. Come now and make a bargain with my master, the king of Assyria. Furthermore, have I come to attack and destroy this place without word from Yahweh? Yahweh himself told me to march against this city and destroy it. Wow. Wow. This is approaching a turning point in the story, by the way. The commander stood and called out in Hebrew, hear the word of the great king, the king of Assyria. This is what the king says. Do not let Hezekiah deceive you. He cannot deliver you from my hand. Do not let Hezekiah persuade you to trust in Yahweh when he says, Yahweh will surely deliver us. This city will not be given in the hand of the king of Assyria. Do not listen to this guy. This is what the king says. Make peace with me and come out, choose life, but not death. This is a good time to bolt from Hezekiah, right? Then these three folks, the administrator, the secretary, and the recorder, went to Hezekiah, tore their clothes, and told him what the commander had said. Now, this is the turning point in the story. The king also wrote letters ridiculing Yahweh, the God of Israel, and saying against him, just as the gods of the people of the other lands did not rescue the people from my hand, so the God of Hezekiah will not rescue people from my hand. And then these letters, other letters that are mocking him, something happens in the hearts of these Hebrews. See, before it was about, are we going to survive? Are we going to have our city intact? Are we going to be a vassal kingdom of Assyria, and then God will one day later rescue us? Or are we going to die? Now, it starts to be, it's no longer about us. You have been insulted. Oh, God. This is unacceptable. So they get the focus off themselves. When they did this, they spoke about God in Jerusalem as they did about the gods of other peoples of the world, the work of human hands. That was just too much. When Hezekiah received the letter from the messengers, he read it, went up to the Lord's temple. There he spread out the letter in front of the Lord and prayed, Lord, who rules over all, you are the God of Israel. You sit on the throne between the cherubim. You alone are God over all the kings of the earth. You've made the heaven and the earth. Listen, Lord, hear us. Open your eyes, Lord. For Yahweh, here. Look at the trouble we're in. Listen to what Sennacherib is saying. You are the living God, and he dares to make fun of you. Unacceptable. Hezekiah turns the focus onto God. That's what we ought to do. When we're trying to make our church better, we've got to make it about God. We can't make it about boomers and Gen Xers and millennials. We've got to make it about God. When we do that, everybody gets represented. Everybody is part of the team. Everybody gets included. But when we make it about our individualism, whatever cultural thing is coming our way that the church gets sucked into sometimes, we get in trouble. Then our compass gets aligned to the proper place when we make it about God. And that's what we've got to do personally in our families, in our difficult spots, in our temptations, in the sins we've given. If we have crossed lines, we've got to make it about God. King Hezekiah, the prophet, Isaiah, son of Amos, cried out to prayer. This is another time in the same real close proximity they prayed together. And the Lord sent an angel who annihilated all the fighting men and the commanders and officers of the camp of the Assyrian king. At this time, they were right there around Jerusalem. 185,000 people. Now get this, brothers and sisters. This story is told in all sorts of archives, like I told you, places in history. Herodotus, the Ethiopians have a story, the Egyptians do, and all this. And they all tell the story that Sennacherib's army was killed right then and there. Now they have different interpretations of it. Some say, well, there was these contaminated rice that came in and poisoned the food, and they died of intestinal disease. And the Bible says they died because of the angel of the Lord came down. Who knows? Maybe the angel of the Lord came down and gave them the disease. I don't know how that happened. There's not enough detail in the story. But they died. They really did die. I mean, that happened. Like right away. So there was a message in Isaiah to Sennacherib. Because you rage against me and because of your insolence has reached my nose or ears, I'll put a hook in your nose and my bit in your mouth, and I'll make you return by the way you came. And he hightailed it back home, defeated, and never went further south to Judah ever again in his lifetime. And he lived well into the next decade, maybe even beyond, I can't remember. But ultimately, he had a really bad outcome that Isaiah foretells. And so here is Sennacherib's version of the account. As to Hezekiah the king, who did not submit to my yoke, I laid things 646, Here's all the things I did. Himself I made a prisoner in Jerusalem, his royal residence like a bird in a cage. That's a real nice redaction. It's really nice. He never tells that he lost the battle. He did what a lot of ancient emperors and nations did, is they hid their defeats. The Bible doesn't hide the defeats. It puts it all out there. The kingdom today should be transparent because God was always calling people to put it on out there, tell the story. But in this story, yeah, Hezekiah was cornered in. Maybe he was a bird in the cage, but man, he was on the winning team. He was on the winning team, and he did the right thing in his cage. Then the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 men, and when the people got up the next morning, there were all these dead bodies, so they saw it right there. So he withdrew to his land, and when he went to the temple of his God, some of his sons, now this is much later, His own flesh and blood cut him down with the sword, and one of his sons became the leader of the kingdom. That's his outcome. So Hezekiah trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. There was no one like him among all the kings of Judah, either before him or after him. Great story, right? He made it all about God. Here's a really interesting quote. I've got two for you by secular historians. Philip Stern says, with hindsight of 2,700 years, we can see that Sennacherib's campaign to Judah was a fateful moment in history. Had he demolished Jerusalem or even deported its inhabitants, that would have been the end of the state of Judah, and the resulting world would bear little resemblance to our own. All the stuff in the Old Testament up to that time was in Jerusalem. And that includes the Ten Commandments and the entire justice system, by which all Western justice systems have become derivatives of. Constitutions, declarations, civil rights movements have not only borrowed from the story, but have actually quoted Moses as saying there should be no difference in justice for the foreigner, for the alien living among you. It all was the first time in human history that kind of mechanism existed. And it became the one that became the vertebrae of really good justice systems all throughout human history. It nearly was gone at this moment. Another historian said, and this is a famous, recently deceased professor at the University of Chicago, also not a believer, had the Assyrian army remained healthy in 701, Jerusalem would probably have been captured and its people dispersed, as had happened in Samaria only 20 years earlier. Think of what that would mean. The world as we know it today becomes unrecognizable, profoundly, utterly different. Surely there's no greater might have been in all recorded history. This major event that was watched by the world. What is the point that we should learn? Is that we should always do what they did. They realized that it was always about God. And this is my challenge for you, whatever your predicament is in, or the one that you'll be in maybe later this week or sometime soon, that you remember to make it about God. It really does sort out life's complexities when we just make things about God. In preparing for communion, I want to introduce an idea that this is a prequel to another great showdown. Jesus arrives on the scene. When he arrived on the scene, he arrived decades into a corrupt mafioso government over Judah. The clan of Annas and Caiaphas. These are a father, a patriarch figure who had many sons and son-in-laws who ruled Jerusalem and Judah for decades. They were the ones who profited from the money changers. A high fee when people would come to Jerusalem from bringing their currency, and they would charge the high fee and get to keep the proceeds. And they were agricultural people and farmers, so they were the ones who had all the land. So once a year when you have a Passover, and all these people that are coming in from out of town to celebrate, hundreds of thousands of people, by the way, where would they get their lambs from? The clan. And many of the Sadducees who were part of this crony system. It was so corrupt that Jews in the first century eventually created a hymn after the family had died, talking about how awful this family was. Josephus, when he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, to which he dedicates a large amount of words towards, a book that you can access today, describing the destruction in 66 to 70 AD, blames the entire thing on that corrupt family. That family that Jesus took on. So when Jesus enters town the final time that he enters Jerusalem, and he knocks over the money changer's table, and he drives out the oxen, it's a holy version of stick it to the establishment. We're done. This is unacceptable. We're not putting up with it anymore. They didn't have the right to do what they were doing. Their leadership was so corrupt that it didn't even need to be acknowledged anymore. That's pretty serious, because Jesus was all about pay the taxes to the Romans. Do what they do, but do what they say, don't do what they do. Like follow these very fallen leaders. But in this one time, And only he alone could have the authority to do that because he was God. Say, this is enough.
Right.
So they decided to kill him. And that would be the end of the story for them. That was real easy for them to figure out what to do, especially with the Sanhedrin in charge of everything significant that's going to happen in Jerusalem. It was a done deal. Any trials that occurred during that period were superfluous. They didn't mean anything. He was going to die. Didn't matter if the crowd said crucify him or not. He was going to die. Jesus had crossed the line. Now he gets up on the cross forcibly. I mean, he surrenders, but he's put up on the cross, nailed to the cross. And the Hebrew writer says, from the cross, and he looks as if all the shame was coming in his direction. Oh, he must be a criminal because he's died. He got tried. The establishment tried him. It was a fair trial. He must be a criminal. Jesus looks, and he scorned the shame. What that means is, whatever. I'm not letting it in here because I serve him. This is about the Father. This is about the Father. And so he surrendered when it was really tough. So we should also remember that when it's really tough for us. Still make it about God, because that's not the last chapter. Even if you die, as Jesus did, it's not the last chapter. In Acts 2:24 it says, even death could not keep its hold on him. So the two greatest showdowns in the Bible illustrate for us that we can make our lives about God, make our tough decisions about God, make our temptations about him, and do the right thing because of him. It's going to work out for us. Let's pray. God and Father, I thank you for this fantastic story. That we just only need to remember one thing, is that when you are the center of our decision making, and we are concerned about your name and your reputation and your honor, which this world needs so desperately to understand. With you as the guiding compass and North Star for our lives, if we could just do this habitually, not only will it be well for us, it can point so many other people to you. Thank you for Jesus, who did this on a very personal level, staying above sin and taking stands but not being self-righteous, doing what was right but making it about you. Father, thank you for his example and his sacrifice, from which we have derived so many benefits, the forgiveness of our own sins, but a second chance at life. It's in your son Jesus' name we pray.